My name is Olivia Smith. I am 29 years old. In my family, affection was treated like a country club membership. My sister Madison was born with VIP access. I was just the staff. 3 years ago, my grandmother passed away. She left me one specific thing, a vintage jewelry collection she cataloged and willed exclusively to me. 8 pieces, $85,000. It was her final act of care, a financial shield meant to give me the stability my parents reserved only for Madison. When the estate attorney handed me the combination to the wall safe, I drove straight to my parents' house. My mother, Helen, followed me down the hall. She did not offer a hug. She watched me turn the metal dial. The heavy door swung open. The velvet shelves were bare. My mother covered her mouth and gasped loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She immediately blamed the visiting hospice nurse. But my mother did not know I am a licensed gemologist. I did not look at her fake tears. I looked at the floor. And what I found buried in the carpet fibers started a 3-year war that ended with me legally buying back my own stolen inheritance. Welcome back to Elena Vengeance, where families who steal your future learn that receipts never expire. If you have ever been the family scapegoat, drop your age in the comments and tell me the moment you realized you had to walk away. I read every single one. If you are new here, hit subscribe. You are going to want to hear how this ledger balances. Let me take you back to that stifling October afternoon in Mountain Brook, Alabama. Gran lived in the attached in-law suite of my parents' sprawling colonial. For 4 years, I was her caretaker. I managed her medications, tracked her vitals, and sat by her bed when her memory frayed at the edges. Helen held the master key to the suite, but she rarely crossed the threshold unless she was showing off the property square footage to her friends. Madison treated the room like a museum she had no interest in visiting. Gran was a woman of deliberate intention. She knew the safe was my only safety net. The air in the suite still smelled like stale lavender and rubbing alcohol. I knelt in front of the open wall safe. The mahogany display boxes were missing. I leaned closer. The velvet backing on the bottom shelf was torn, the fabric pushed backward against the steel. Someone had dragged those heavy boxes out in a blind rush. A hospice nurse stealing an estate collection takes her time to secure the payout. Someone panicking, ripping boxes from a safe they unlocked with a master key, creates collateral damage. "We need to call the precinct," Helen said. Her voice pitched a full octave higher than her normal speaking tone. "That woman robbed my mother. I cannot believe the agency sent a thief into my home." I stayed on my knees. I ran my fingers along the baseboard, pressing deep into the cream carpet fibers right below the safe door. The fibers were dense. My fingertip caught on a sharp, faceted edge. I pressed down and pulled the object free. A single, unheated, 2-carat salon sapphire. It belonged to the center cluster of Gran's platinum sunburst brooch. I rolled the cold stone between my thumb and index finger. I stood up. Helen was holding her phone, her thumb resting over the screen. She was waiting for me to panic. "You can call the police if you want," I said. My voice came out flat. "But the detective will require proof of forced entry." "There is no forced entry. The dial is not scratched. The hinges are intact. Whoever took the boxes had the master key." Helen swallowed. Her gaze darted from my face to the open safe and back again. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She did not dial. I slipped the sapphire into my pocket. I walked past her, down the hall, and out the front door. I did not scream. I did not demand a confession. I drove to a stationery store on Main Street and purchased a black leather notebook. I sat in my car in the parking lot, the Alabama heat radiating through the windshield. I opened the cover to the first page. I uncapped a blue pen. Item 1. Grand safe empty. Loose sapphire recovered from carpet, October 14th. The ink dried, the documentation began. But the real betrayal had not even surfaced yet. 2 weeks later, Madison would announce her engagement to a local legacy family, and the true cost of that empty safe would step into the light. 2 weeks passed. The silence from my mother was a heavy blanket draped over the house. She did not mention the empty safe again. Then Madison came over for Sunday dinner. She walked through the front door, holding her left hand suspended in the air like it was carrying something fragile. A 3-carat princess-cut diamond rested on her ring finger. Carter was standing behind her. He was the son of a third-generation textile family who spent their weekends at the country club, sipping gin and complaining about capital gains taxes. Madison had been orbiting his social circle for 3 years, waiting for the invitation to land. The engagement ring was her entry ticket. The house turned into a staging ground for a performance I was not cast in. Helen bought bridal magazines by the stack. She hired a wedding planner from Atlanta who charged by the hour to nod at her ideas. They talked about importing peonies from Holland and securing a string quartet for the reception. I sat at the edge of the living room drinking tap water while they reviewed swatches of ivory silk. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody mentioned Gran. My grief was inconvenient to their celebration. I watched them build a fantasy. I just did not know who was funding it. Not yet. It happened on a Tuesday night. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my small apartment, editing appraisal reports for my gemology firm. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed with a group text from a cousin. She sent a link to Madison's public Pinterest board. The message said, "Look at the floral budget. She is losing her mind." I clicked the link. The screen filled with curated images of tiered cakes and lace veils. I scrolled past the table settings and the bridesmaid dress concepts. My thumb stopped. The air in my kitchen turned thin. It was a reference photo for the bridal bouquet. White orchids bound in ivory satin ribbon. Pinned to the center of the ribbon was a piece of jewelry, a platinum sunburst. Intricate mill-grain detailing along the edges, a halo of diamonds surrounding a cluster of salon sapphires. I remembered Gran wearing that brooch on her lapel during church services when I was a little girl. I zoomed in on the image. The resolution blurred, but my trained eyes caught the structural defect. The bottom right prong in the center cluster was empty, a dark void where a 2-carat stone should have been sitting, the exact sapphire resting inside the pocket of my winter coat. I read the caption typed beneath the photo. "Something borrowed. Thanks, Mom." My heart pushed hard against my ribs. I did not throw my phone. I did not cry. I stared at the screen and let the math assemble itself in my head. Gran owned 8 pieces. Madison only had 1 pinned to her board. Helen was vain, but she was not a professional thief. She did not know how to navigate the black market. If she wanted to convert 7 pieces of high-end vintage jewelry into liquid cash to fund a society wedding, she would go to the only place she knew, the Antique Row in the historic district. Silas Thorne ran an estate brokerage 10 minutes from my parents' house. Helen used him to appraise antique silver she bought at estate sales. He operated out of a dusty shop smelling of brass polish and old paper. The next morning, I parked my car across the street from his storefront. The morning air was crisp, but my hands were warm. I wore my tailored blazer and pinned my certified gemologist badge to the lapel. I pushed the glass door open. A brass bell chimed overhead. Silas was standing behind a glass display counter, polishing a silver pocket watch. He looked up and offered a practiced retail smile. "Good morning," he said. "Are you looking for something specific?" I walked to the counter and placed my hands flat on the glass. I looked down at the display case. It was filled with mid-century cameos and tarnished pearls. I did not smile back. "I am looking for the intake ledger from October 16th, I said. Silas stopped polishing the watch. His eyes flicked to my badge. "I do not share client records," he said. His tone dropped an octave. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. I had printed the Pinterest photo of the sunburst brooch. I placed the photo on the glass and slid it toward him. "This is a stolen platinum and sapphire piece from the Beatrice Smith estate. The estate holds 8 pieces valued at $85,000. The primary beneficiary of that estate is standing in front of you." Silas looked at the photo. A thin layer of sweat appeared on his upper lip. I leaned closer to the counter. The smell of brass polish was overpowering. I am currently drafting a police report for stolen property, I said. When a detective traces an $85,000 jewelry heist to a local broker, they do not just ask for the items back. They look into fencing charges. They audit your entire back room. They pull your business license and freeze your accounts. I paused, letting the silence stretch. A grandfather clock ticked against the far wall. Or, I continued, you can leave the police out of it. You can show me the ledger from the day Helen Smith walked in here. You can prove you acted as a blind buyer and had no knowledge the items were stolen. You can protect your business right now. Silas blinked. He wiped his hands on a microfiber cloth. His fingers trembled slightly. He turned around and unlocked a filing cabinet against the back wall. He pulled out a leather-bound logbook and brought it to the counter. He flipped through the thick pages until he reached the second week of October. He turned the book toward me. My eyes scanned the handwritten columns. Date, client name, item description, payout. There it was. Helen Smith, 7 items. Edwardian diamond bracelet, ruby drop earrings, pearl choker. The list went on. The final column showed the payout amount, $72,000, paid in cash. Helen did not sell the brooch. She held on to it because it matched the aesthetic of Madison's dream wedding. She liquidated my grandmother's legacy for $72,000 in untraceable cash. Silas cleared his throat. She told me her mother gave them to her to cover debts, he said. I assumed she had the right to sell. I pulled out my phone and took clear, high-resolution photos of the ledger pages. Every line, every signature. I put my phone back in my pocket. You assumed wrong, I said. I turned away from the counter and walked out of the shop. The brass bell chimed behind me. I sat in my car. My hands gripped the steering wheel. The leather felt warm under my palms. I took a slow breath. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was quantified, itemized, and stamped with a date. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up the black leather notebook. I opened it to the second page. I took out my blue pen. Item 2, Silas Thorne Estate Brokerage Ledger. 7 pieces fenced for $72,000 cash. Helen Smith's signature confirmed. Date, November 3rd. I closed the notebook. The clasp clicked shut. The money was gone. The jewelry was gone. But the arrogance of my mother keeping the most recognizable piece so my sister could flaunt it in front of the entire town was a tactical error. They thought I was weak because I had spent my life staying quiet. They confused my silence with submission. I started the engine. I was not going to let them spend my future without looking me in the eye. I pulled out of the parking space and turned the car toward Mountain Brook. It was time to pay a visit to the kitchen, where they were planning their perfect wedding. The drive to Mountain Brook felt different this time. For years, I had navigated these winding, oak-lined streets with a sense of quiet duty. I was the reliable daughter, the caretaker who blended into the background while the rest of the neighborhood flaunted their generational wealth. Today, the white fences and manicured lawns looked like stage props. My tires crunched over the crushed gravel of my parents' driveway. I parked behind Madison's convertible. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet cabin of my car. My pulse beat a steady, rhythmic drum against my collarbone. I held a printed copy of Silas Thorne's estate ledger in my right hand. The paper felt heavy, bearing the weight of a $72,000 betrayal. I walked up the brick pathway and pushed the heavy mahogany front door open. The house was unlocked. In this zip code, locking your door implied you had something to fear from your neighbors. The air conditioning wrapped around me, carrying the scent of vanilla candles and catered pastries. I followed the sound of voices down the hallway, my heels clicking a sharp cadence against the hardwood floor. The kitchen was the staging ground for their grand illusion. It was a sprawling space with custom white cabinetry and an expansive Calcutta marble island. Madison sat on a velvet bar stool, flipping through a thick binder filled with fabric swatches and floral arrangements. Her new diamond ring caught the light from the recessed fixtures, sending fractured rainbows across the countertops. Helen stood across from her, holding a crystal glass of sweet tea. Condensation dripped down her knuckles. My father, Richard, leaned against the stainless steel refrigerator. He wore his golf polos crisp and his khakis pressed. He was reviewing a catering invoice, a pair of wire reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. The conversation died the second I walked into the room. 3 heads turned in my direction. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered me a glass of tea. I stepped up to the marble island. I placed the printed copy of the estate ledger flat on the cold stone. I slid the paper forward. It stopped inches from my mother's iced tea. Helen looked down. Her eyes scanned the black ink. She saw the columns of dates and payouts. She saw her own forged signature at the bottom. A drop of condensation fell from her glass and hit the corner of the paper, blurring a dark ink stain. For a fraction of a second, raw panic flashed across her features. Her throat swallowed hard, the muscles jumping under her pearls. Then the panic vanished. It was replaced by a hardened, familiar mask of indignation. She did not apologize. She did not deny it. She lifted her chin and looked me straight in the eye. "You have no right to snoop through my private business," Helen said. Her tone was smooth, polished, like a river stone. I kept my voice level. Selling my inheritance to a local fence is not your private business. It is a crime. Helen let out a short, hollow laugh. She waved a manicured hand in the air, dismissing the ledger like a bad restaurant receipt. "A crime," she repeated. "You are being dramatic. Your grandmother was confused at the end. She did not understand the financial reality of this family. You are 29 years old, Olivia. You are single. You rent a 1-bedroom apartment. You do not need an $85,000 nest egg gathering dust in a dark safe. Madison needs this wedding." I shifted my gaze to my sister. Madison closed her fabric binder. She did not look guilty. She looked annoyed. "Carter comes from a legacy family," Madison said. Her voice carried a nasal whine that grated against the vanilla-scented air. "His parents expect a certain caliber of event. If we do not host a reception at the club, they will think we are poor. I cannot walk down the aisle looking like a charity case. I need that sapphire brooch for my bouquet. It is the perfect vintage touch." I stared at her. She viewed Grand's legacy as a prop for her social climbing. My future stability, my safety net, was traded for an aesthetic detail on a floral arrangement. Richard took his reading glasses off and folded them. He stepped away from the refrigerator. His jaw was set tight. "Stop being selfish, Olivia," he said. The word hung in the kitchen. Selfish. I looked at the man who had worked his entire life to maintain an illusion of wealth. He funded country club dues over college tuition. He bought luxury cars on leases he could barely afford just to keep up with the neighbors. His own ego depended on Carter's family accepting them. "You are living in the past," Richard continued. "Families share. That is how this works. We pooled our resources to ensure your sister secures a strong future. When your time comes, we will be there for you." The lie was so thick I could taste it. There would be no pool of resources for me. I was the safety net they cut to weave a hammock for Madison. "You pooled my resources," I said. The air conditioning kicked on, a low hum filling the tense silence. "You took the only thing Gran left me. You pawned 7 pieces for $72,000 in untraceable cash. And you kept the brooch because Madison wanted a photo prop." Madison slammed her hand flat against the marble counter. "You are just a jealous spinster," she sneered. Her face flushed a mottled red, the veins standing out on her neck. "You have always been jealous of me. You want to ruin my joy because no man is ever going to buy you a ring like this." She thrust her left hand forward, the diamond flashing under the lights. "You are trying to sabotage my wedding over old jewelry nobody even wears anymore." Helen took a sip of her iced tea. The ice clinked against the crystal. "If you make a scene about this, Olivia, you will not be welcome at the ceremony," she said. I will not let your bitterness cast a shadow over your sister's special day. Leave it alone. Do not embarrass this family." I stood perfectly still. My breathing slowed. I looked at my mother, my father, and my sister. I did not feel rage. I felt a cold, sweeping clarity. In this house, love was a line item on a ledger. I had been paying into an account that would never yield a return. They did not just dismiss my inheritance, they framed me as the villain for daring to ask for what was legally mine. The audacity was staggering. They wanted me to absorb the cost of their ambition and smile while they spent it. I did not scream. I did not hurl insults. I reached across the cold marble and picked up the printed ledger. I folded the paper in half, creasing the edge with my thumb. "You did not share," I said. My voice was quiet, lacking any tremor. "You stole." I turned my back to them. I walked out of the kitchen, down the hallway, and out the front door. The heavy mahogany shut behind me with a solid thud. The Alabama heat hit my face, but I felt strangely cold. I climbed into my car and locked the doors. I pulled the black leather notebook from the passenger seat. I uncapped my blue pen. Item 3, kitchen audit. Gaslighting confirmed. Total loss acknowledged. Date, November 12th. I closed the notebook. The clasp clicked shut. The battle lines were drawn. The emotional baseline was set. But staying in Mountain Brook meant playing defense against a family who controlled the narrative. They had the country club. They had the gossip mill. They had the ear of every neighbor and aunt in the county. I knew exactly what Helen would do next. She would twist the story to make me the unstable, bitter sister who tried to ruin a wedding. I needed to build a fortress before they launched their attack, and I knew the exact, silent, devastating exit I was going to make. The fallout began before my tires hit the county line. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an aunt I had not spoken to since Christmas. I ignored it. 5 minutes later, a text from my cousin arrived. "What did you do to Madison? She is hysterical." I ignored that too. The smear campaign was moving with the predictable speed of Southern gossip. Helen was already spinning the narrative. She would paint herself as the exhausted matriarch dealing with an unstable daughter whose jealousy over a wedding had triggered a mental breakdown. I knew the playbook. I refused to read the script. I parked at my apartment complex, climbed the 2 flights of stairs, and locked my deadbolt. I opened my phone settings and navigated to the Brooks family thread. A string of 50 text messages, all analyzing my behavior, crowded the screen. I did not read a single one. I swiped left, delete. Then I blocked their numbers: Helen, Richard, Madison. I severed the digital tethers holding me to their performance. It was the first step of the silent exodus. I walked into my small living room and sat on the edge of the sofa. The silence was thick. It was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suspended quiet right before a storm breaks. I closed my eyes and let a memory surface. I was 12 years old, sitting at the small wooden workbench in Gran's suite. The smell of metal polish and strong Earl Grey tea filled the air. Gran handed me a small brass jeweler's loop. She placed a vintage diamond ring under a high-intensity desk lamp. The stone flashed, blindingly bright, catching the light and breaking it into sharp, colorful shards. "Beautiful, isn't it, Livy?" Gran asked. Her voice was raspy, worn down by decades of cheap cigarettes. I nodded, mesmerized by the fire trapped inside the gem. "It is perfect," I whispered. Gran gently tapped my hand. "Put the loop to your eye. Look closer." I squinted through the magnifying lens. The blinding sparkle vanished. The structure of the diamond filled my vision. I saw tiny black specks embedded deep within the carbon lattice. A feather-like crack ran along the bottom pavilion, threatening to split the stone if it took a hard hit. "The surface is designed to blind you," Gran said, her rough hand resting on my shoulder. "It distracts you from the structural integrity. Do not trust the fire. Look past the sparkle, Livy. The flaws tell you the truth about the stone. I opened my eyes. My living room was dark. The memories settled in my chest, heavy and precise. I had spent 29 years looking at the fire. The country club memberships, the sprawling colonial house, the tailored golf polos, the carefully curated Sunday dinners. It was all surface polish designed to blind the neighbors. Beneath the sparkle, the structural integrity of the Smith family was rotten. They were fractured by greed and held together by the brittle glue of social status. I was not going to let their flaws shatter me. The next morning, I walked into the local branch of my bank. The teller smiled, a bright, rehearsed expression. "Good morning, Miss Smith. How can I help you today?" "I need to sever my checking account from the family trust line," I said. "I want to remove Richard and Helen Smith as secondary emergency contacts on all my profiles. I need a hard partition." The teller's smile faltered. "That requires a mountain of paperwork and a certified notary." I placed my driver's license on the counter. "Start printing." The process took 3 days. It was grueling bureaucratic combat. I untangled 10 years of intertwined financial roots. I bought out my portion of the family cell phone plan. I redirected my mail to a private post office box. I transferred my emergency medical proxy. The isolation felt physical, an ache in my sternum. I was amputating a limb to save the body. That Friday, I met David. He walked into the gemology firm carrying a scuffed leather briefcase. He was 31, wearing a charcoal suit that was clean but unpretentious. He was an independent forensic accountant hired by the firm to audit our quarterly intake records. He did not make small talk. He did not brag about his weekend plans. He sat at the conference table, opened an Excel spreadsheet, and worked with a quiet, lethal efficiency. He found a $2,000 discrepancy in less than an hour. Our lead appraiser was furious. David simply pointed to line item 42 on the spreadsheet. "The numbers do not have egos," David said, his voice calm, an anchor dropping in a turbulent sea. "They just document the truth." I felt an immediate, magnetic pull. I introduced myself in the break room while he poured a cup of black coffee. We started talking about valuation metrics. That led to dinner at a quiet Thai restaurant. That led to long walks by the river. I did not hide my situation. On our third date, I told him everything. The empty safe, the Pinterest board, the broker ledger, the kitchen audit. I watched his face, waiting for the pity or the uncomfortable silence I usually received when people learned my family was toxic. David did not flinch. He set his fork down. He looked at me with those steady, analytical eyes. He did not tell me to forgive them. He did not offer platitudes about blood being thicker than water. "You do not need an apology, Olivia," he said. "You need a firewall." He was right. David became the architect of my new foundation. He helped me structure a limited liability company. We registered the business under a blind trust, shielding my identity from public commercial databases. I named the company Beatrice Heritage. I resigned from the gemology firm, cashed out my meager savings, and packed my apartment into a rented moving truck. I drove 2 hours north to Birmingham, leaving the sprawling lawns and fake smiles of Mountain Brook in my rearview mirror. Birmingham offered anonymity. The industrial brick lofts and thriving arts district were a different world. I signed a lease on a subterranean studio space with reinforced steel doors and high-security windows. I set up my jeweler's bench. I bought an ultrasonic cleaner, a digital microscope, and a heavy-duty wall safe. I started sourcing broken, discarded vintage pieces from obscure estate sales across the state. I cleaned them. I restored their settings. I brought the dead stones back to life. I branded myself simply as O. Smith. I built a sleek, minimalist website. My marketing targeted high-net-worth clients who valued discretion and authentic craftsmanship over flashy brand names. I worked 14-hour days. My hands were stained with polishing compound. My back ached from hunching over the microscope. I ate takeout boxes of cold noodles while reviewing inventory logs. Whenever the exhaustion threatened to break my resolve, I opened the black leather notebook. The pages grounded me. Item 1, Item 2, Item 3. The receipts fueled my focus. Back in Mountain Brook, Helen escalated her campaign. A cousin forwarded me screenshots of Facebook posts. Helen wrote lengthy, passive-aggressive statuses about the pain of a prodigal daughter refusing to attend her own sister's wedding. Madison posted photos of her bridal showers, surrounded by smiling friends, tagging everyone except me. The comment sections were filled with sympathetic neighbors praying for my return. They were putting on a masterclass in public relations. I did not respond. I let them talk to an empty room, let them have the town gossip. I was building a financial fortress they could not breach. My revenue climbed steadily. I secured a contract to restore a collection for a prominent Atlanta family. The O. Smith moniker began circulating in quiet, exclusive circles. David reviewed my quarterly projections, a rare smile breaking across his stoic features. "You are outpacing your goals by 40%, he noted, tapping his pen against the printed spreadsheet. I leaned back in my desk chair, wiping a smudge of metal polish from my cheek. I looked at the heavy steel safe bolted to my studio wall. It was full. The contrast was sharp. My family was busy curating a fake empire built on stolen funds. I was building a real one from scratch. But the quiet peace of Birmingham was temporary. April was approaching, the month of Madison's $100,000 spectacle. The calendar was ticking down to a wedding day that would test the strength of the firewall David and I had built, pushing the silent conflict into a very public arena. April rolled into Alabama carrying the heavy, humid scent of blooming magnolias and incoming storms. In Mountain Brook, April meant the start of the social season. For my family, it meant the culmination of a year-long grift. It was the month of Madison's wedding. I stayed in Birmingham, buried in the quiet rhythm of my studio. The high-pitched whine of the ultrasonic cleaner and the scratch of my polishing cloth were my soundtrack. I did not check social media. I did not look at the weather forecast in my hometown. I focused on the geometric perfection of a damaged Art Deco bracelet I was restoring for a client in Nashville. The work was demanding, requiring absolute precision. It left no room for the noise of my mother's performance. The morning of the ceremony arrived, a Saturday. I woke up at 6, made a pot of strong black coffee, and sat at my kitchen counter reviewing a contract. My phone vibrated against the wood surface. The screen lit up, a text from an unknown number. But the syntax was unmistakable. It possessed the sharp, victimized tone my mother wielded like a scalpel. The text read, "The florist just finished the archway. It is breathtaking. There is an empty chair in the second row, right behind the family pew. Everyone is asking why you hate your sister. Your father is heartbroken. I hope your stubbornness is keeping you warm today." I set my coffee mug down. The ceramic clicked against the table. I stared at the glowing screen. Helen had bought a burner phone or borrowed a bridesmaid's device just to bypass the block I put on her number months ago. The dedication to her manipulation was almost impressive. She wanted to inject her guilt into my bloodstream. She wanted me sitting in my apartment, paralyzed by the thought of my empty chair and the whispers of the country club elite. I did not reply. I did not throw the phone. I pressed the 2 buttons on the side of the device to capture the screen. The shutter sound clicked. I opened the email app, attached the screenshot, and sent it to my encrypted server. I stood up, walked to my desk, and opened the black leather notebook. Item 8. Wedding Day Manipulation. Text message from alternate number. Exploitation of public image confirmed. Date, April 22nd. I closed the notebook. The clasp snapped shut, sealing the guilt away. I picked up my coffee and went to work. I refused to let my mother dictate the terms of my day. While Helen was directing caterers and Madison was sitting in a makeup chair complaining about the humidity, I was on a secure video call with an estate liquidator in Charleston. He was representing a family looking to offload a massive, uncatalogued collection of Victorian-era jewelry. The liquidator was skeptical of my anonymous O. Smith branding. He pressed hard on my valuation methods, trying to lowball the quality of the raw stones. I did not flinch. I pulled up my microscopic imaging slides. I walked him through the specific gravity of the rubies, proving they were Burmese, not synthetic. I pointed out the unique cut of the mine diamonds. I dismantled his arguments with cold, hard gemology. By noon, he conceded. I wired the deposit. I acquired the entire collection for Beatrice Heritage. It was a career-defining acquisition. It would quadruple my inventory and elevate my brand from a boutique restoration service to a major player in the southern estate market. I logged off the call, my heart hammering a steady rhythm of victory against my ribs. I had just secured my future. And I had done it using my own expertise, my own capital, and my own name. The sun set, casting long, dark shadows across the brick walls of my Birmingham loft. Down in Mountain Brook, the reception was undoubtedly in full swing. A cousin, ignoring my request for radio silence, sent me a single photo before I could block her new number. I opened the message. It was a candid shot from the dance floor. Madison was in the center, spinning in a custom Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than my first car. Her head was thrown back in laughter. Pinned to the center of her plunging neckline, catching the strobe lights and flashing a brilliant, stolen blue, was Grand's sapphire sunburst brooch. I stared at the image. The brooch looked heavy against the delicate lace. It did not belong there. It belonged in a velvet box, passed down in quiet love, not flaunted as a trophy bought with betrayal. I felt a sharp sting, a phantom pain in a severed limb. But the pain vanished almost immediately, replaced by a profound, hollow clarity. David knocked on my studio door at 7. He stood in the hallway, wearing a pair of faded jeans and a casual button-down, holding a brown paper bag from my favorite local diner. "I smell victory," he said, nodding toward the stack of signed contracts on my desk. I closed the laptop screen, hiding the photo of Madison. "The Charleston acquisition cleared," I said. "We own the Victorian collection." David smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He walked in, set the paper bag on my workbench, and pulled out 2 containers of greasy, perfect cheeseburgers and a side of fries. "Grab a chair, O. Smith. We have an empire to celebrate." We sat on 2 metal stools in the middle of my studio. The air smelled of metal polish and fried food. The contrast between my reality and my family's fiction was stark. At the country club, Helen was likely sipping top-shelf champagne, surrounded by floral arrangements that cost $20,000. Richard was probably shaking hands, pretending he owned the room, burying the anxiety of his mounting credit card debt beneath a tailored tuxedo. Madison was dancing in stolen heirlooms, believing the illusion would last forever. They had purchased a $100,000 spectacle to convince the town they were untouchable. I took a bite of my burger. I looked at David, who was currently analyzing the structural integrity of a French fry before eating it. He was solid. He was real. The business we were building was real. Every dollar in the Beatrice Heritage account was clean. I realized, sitting on that metal stool, that I had crossed an emotional threshold. I no longer mourned missing the wedding. I no longer felt the sharp sting of the scapegoat. The anger that had fueled my silent exodus had burned off, leaving behind a cold, quiet empowerment. I mourned the family I thought I had, the mother who should have protected me, the sister who should have shared my grief. But I did not miss the people they actually were. I was entirely free of their gravitational pull. The evening ended quietly. David helped me clear the workbench. He kissed my forehead before leaving, telling me to get some sleep. I locked the heavy steel doors to the studio. The dark quiet of the loft settled around me. I felt safe. I felt untouchable. But safety is an illusion when you are dealing with a toxic system. Toxic systems do not just let the scapegoat walk away. When the scapegoat stops playing the game, the system loses its shock absorber. The pressure inside the Smith family was building. The wedding was over. The bills were coming due. The fake empire was running out of cash. And when the money dried up, the people who stole my past would inevitably come looking for my future. The quiet peace of Birmingham was about to shatter, and the next threat would not come disguised as an empty chair. It would come disguised as legal extortion. The 2 years following the wedding evaporated into the hum of the polishing wheel and the clink of raw gemstones on metal trays. Time is the ultimate solvent. It dissolves the raw edges of grief and leaves behind the solid architecture of a new life. Beatrice Heritage outgrew the subterranean studio. I moved the operation into a sleek commercial space in the Birmingham Design District, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows and a private consultation room for high-net-worth clients. David and I bought a house in the hills south of the city. It was a mid-century modern build surrounded by old-growth pines, boasting a wraparound deck where we drank coffee in the quiet hours of the morning. It was my sanctuary. The Mountain Brook crowd faded into a distant echo. I did not hear from my mother. I did not hear from my sister. My father remained a ghost. The firewall held. The business flourished. My bank accounts reflected the steady, calculated growth of a woman who trusted numbers more than people. Then, on a humid Tuesday in late August, the postal carrier knocked on the glass door of my design studio. He held a thick, white envelope. Certified mail. Signature required. I wiped my hands on my canvas apron and signed the digital pad. The envelope was heavy, the paper stock expensive. I looked at the return address. It was a law firm based in Mobile, notorious for ambulance chasing and quick settlement shakedowns. I carried the envelope into my private office, sat behind my oak desk, and slid a silver letter opener through the seal. I unfolded the 3 pages. The legal jargon was dense, but the core message cut through the formatting like a knife. It was a formal cease and desist order, accompanied by a notice of intent to sue. The plaintiff was Richard Smith, my father. I read the second paragraph, my breath stalling in my lungs. The document accused me of financial elder abuse. It claimed that during my time as Grand's caretaker, I exploited her declining mental faculties. It alleged I coerced her into signing over the vintage jewelry collection. The lawyer painted a picture of a manipulative daughter preying on a confused widow, securing a fraudulent inheritance while the rest of the family grieved. The audacity paralyzed me. They were accusing me of the exact crime they committed. Helen stole the collection, fenced it for cash to fund a society wedding, and now Richard was putting his name on a legal threat blaming me for the theft. I forced my eyes down to the final page, the demand. The lawyer stated that Richard was prepared to take this to civil court, tying my business up in lengthy public litigation. However, the plaintiff was willing to settle the matter privately, preserving the family reputation, for a one-time payment, $50,000. I dropped the paper onto the desk. The letters blurred together. My pulse hammered in my ears, a fast, warning rhythm. Richard had found me. He had pierced the veil of my LLC, traced the corporate filings, and realized Beatrice Heritage was generating serious revenue. The timing was too precise. Men like my father do not hire sleazy attorneys to extort their estranged daughters unless they are drowning. The illusion in Mountain Brook was cracking. The country club dues, the leased luxury cars, the endless pursuit of status. The bill had finally come due. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The Birmingham skyline stretched out before me, solid and real. My family was trying to rob me a second time. The first time, they stole my past. Now, they were trying to steal my present. They assumed I was still the quiet caretaker, the girl who walked away without a fight. They thought a piece of legal stationery would terrify me into writing a check to keep the peace. Silence was no longer enough. Walking away only gave them the space to reload. I needed heavy armor. I needed a weapon. I packed up my briefcase, locked the studio, and drove home. The winding roads up the hillside usually calmed my nerves, but today every shadow looked like a trap. I parked in the driveway, walked into the kitchen, and placed the letter flat on the center of the granite island. David arrived 30 minutes later. He loosened his tie, set his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, and walked into the kitchen. He took one look at my posture. I was leaning against the sink, my arms crossed tight over my chest. His gaze dropped to the thick white paper on the island. He did not ask what was wrong. He walked over, picked up the letter, and read it in silence. I watched his eyes track back and forth across the page. He reached the second paragraph. He reached the $50,000 demand. He set the paper down. He smoothed a small crease in the corner of the page. He did not look angry. He looked fascinated, like a scientist observing a rare, highly predictable mutation. Financial elder abuse, David repeated. The tone of his voice was clinical. He is claiming you stole the assets your mother sold to Silas Thorne. He wants $50,000 to keep my name out of court, I said. My voice was tight, thin as a wire. He knows a public lawsuit could damage the Beatrice heritage brand. He is banking on me paying the ransom to protect my client list. He is drowning, David. Why else would he risk this? David unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. The forensic accountant was clocking in. He walked around the island and stood next to me. He rested his hand on the small of my back, a warm, steady anchor. Your father is making a desperate play, David said. Extortion is the last resort of a man who has run out of credit. He thinks he is playing poker. He thinks he can bluff you into folding. I looked up at him. What do we do? David smiled. It was a cold, calculating expression. It was the smile of a man who spent his life dismantling frauds, brick by brick. If they want to open the books, David said softly, let us open the books. He picked up his laptop bag from the hallway, brought it to the kitchen counter, and flipped the screen open. The glow of the monitor illuminated the sharp angles of his face. He pulled up a specialized database, a portal he used to run background checks on corporate embezzlers. We are not going to write a check, David continued, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. We are going to find out exactly why Richard Smith needs $50,000 so badly. People who live above their means leave a paper trail. Mortgages, second mortgages, hidden lines of credit, liens. We are going to map every single dollar of debt attached to his name. We are going to find the leak. I stood beside him, watching the screen fill with lines of data. The fear that had gripped me in the studio evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, tactical focus. My father had invited a forensic auditor into his financial house without realizing the door was unlocked. David pulled up the county property records. He navigated to the deed for the sprawling colonial in Mountain Brook. He started pulling the loan history. I reached into my bag and pulled out the black leather notebook. I opened it to a fresh page. The leather creaked in the quiet kitchen. I uncapped my blue pen. Item 10, extortion attempt by Richard Smith. Fraudulent legal threat received. Demand for $50,000. Date, August 28th. I left the notebook open on the counter. The game had changed. I was no longer the victim running from the theft. I was the predator, analyzing the bait. The Smith family thought they could squeeze me for cash to plug the holes in their sinking ship. But David was already digging deep into the hull, and what he was about to uncover, hidden in the dark corners of Richard's ledgers, would not just explain the extortion. It would expose the true, devastating cost of my sister's wedding, shattering the golden child's illusion forever. The glow of the laptop screen cast sharp shadows across David's face. He had been digging for 3 hours. The kitchen was silent except for the rapid click of his keyboard. I sat across from him, a cup of cold tea resting between my hands. I watched him pull property deeds, public tax filings, and UCC lien records. He was mapping the anatomy of a financial collapse. At 11:15 p.m., David stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He stared at the screen for a long time before he spoke. The math does not work, he said. His voice was low, laced with genuine confusion. I set my mug down. What do you mean? He turned the laptop toward me. The screen displayed a complex flowchart of Richard's accounts. According to the estate broker's ledger you found, Helen walked out of Silas Thorne's shop with $72,000 in cash. You assume that money funded Madison's wedding. I looked at the flowchart. Yes, the floral arrangements, the string quartet, the venue. It was a $100,000 event. They used Grand's money to pay the deposits. David shook his head. No, they didn't. He pointed to a specific line item on the screen. The country club venue deposit was paid with a high-interest American Express card. The florist was paid via a secondary line of credit taken out in Helen's name. The catering was put on a newly opened Visa. Every major vendor for that wedding was financed through consumer debt. They maxed out 5 separate credit lines between November and April. I stared at the numbers. The realization felt like a physical blow. If they put the wedding on credit cards, where did the $72,000 go? David tapped a different section of the flowchart. It went here. A series of wire transfers executed 3 days after Helen sold the jewelry. The recipient accounts trace back to offshore holdings commonly associated with unregulated sportsbooks and offshore casinos. The air in the kitchen turned freezing cold. I looked at David, my mind struggling to process the data. Gambling? Richard? He owes catastrophic money, David confirmed. The $50,000 extortion letter he sent you today? That is just the interest he owes on a balloon payment due next month. The principal is well over $200,000. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, creating a horrifying picture. Helen did not sell my inheritance just to give Madison a perfect wedding. She sold it to save her husband's knees from loan sharks. The entire $100,000 spectacle was a smokescreen. They threw a massive public party using borrowed money to convince the town they were solvent, while secretly shoveling the real cash into the black hole of Richard's addiction. Madison's dream wedding was nothing more than a glittering distraction, a cover-up for a failing patriarch. I let out a harsh, humorless breath. My golden child sister thought she was the center of their universe. She thought they sacrificed my inheritance out of pure devotion to her. She had no idea her perfect day was funded by Visa, and my grandmother's legacy paid a bookie. David closed the laptop. Your father is a desperate man standing on a trap door. He sent that extortion letter hoping you would panic and hand over the cash to plug the leak. He picked the wrong target, I said. I picked up the black leather notebook. I did not log the extortion attempt. I logged the motive. Item 11. Richard Smith gambling debt confirmed. Estate funds diverted to offshore sports books. Wedding financed via consumer credit. The facade in Mountain Brook was not just cracking, it was structurally compromised. The foundation was gone, and the collapse was accelerating faster than I anticipated. 3 days later, my phone vibrated. I was in my studio, setting a delicate opal into a rose gold pendant. I pulled off my magnification visor and picked up the device. It was a text message from Madison. She had not contacted me in 2 years. I stared at the screen, watching the typing bubble appear, disappear, and reappear. Finally, a block of text arrived. Carter's parents cut him off. They froze his trust account. We are 2 months behind on the mortgage. Mom says your business is doing really well. I am in serious trouble, Liv. I need a $15,000 loan just to get through the quarter. Please. Family helps family. I read the message twice. The audacity was breathtaking. It pulled the oxygen right out of the room. The sister who paraded my stolen heirloom down the aisle, the sister who called me a jealous spinster and barred me from her life, was now asking for a bailout. She still believed she was entitled to my resources. She believed the rules of the country club applied here. If you ignore the past, it ceases to exist. I looked at the opal resting on my workbench. It was flawed, fragile, but honest in its composition. My sister was none of those things. She was drowning in the reality of marrying a man whose only asset was his last name. I placed my fingers over the keyboard. I did not write a paragraph explaining my anger. I did not bring up the extortion letter Richard sent. I delivered a single calculated strike. I typed, I suggest you sell the sapphire brooch. I hit send. The response was immediate. It was not a text, it was a phone call. I watched her name flash on the screen. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a barrage of texts flooded my screen. You are a heartless monster. I am losing my home and you are making jokes about a piece of jewelry? You have always hated me. You want to see me fail. Do not ever contact me again. I read the vitriol, feeling absolutely nothing. I opened the settings menu on her contact profile. I selected Mute Alerts. I picked up my blue pen. Item 14, the $15,000 demand. Madison's financial collapse confirmed. Carter defunded. Suggestion to liquidate brooch delivered. Date September 2nd. I set the pen down. I looked at the dark screen of my phone. Madison was desperate. Her husband was broke. Her parents were secretly drowning in gambling debt and could not save her. She was isolated, terrified, and grasping for a lifeline. Desperate people make fatal mistakes. They stop thinking strategically and start acting on raw instinct. I had planted the seed. I suggested she sell the brooch. I knew she would initially reject the idea out of pride, but as the collection notices piled up and the reality of foreclosure set in, that pride would erode. She would look at that platinum sunburst sitting in her jewelry box and see it for what it truly was: liquid cash. But Madison was not a criminal mastermind. She was a socialite, accustomed to easy transactions. She would not know how to fence a stolen $85,000 heirloom safely. She would try to hide the sale from Carter to save face. She would try to hide it from Helen, assuming the brooch was legally Helen's to give. She would seek out a discreet, high-end buyer out of state, far away from the gossiping eyes of Mountain Brook. I went back to setting the opal. My hands were steady. The trap was laid. Madison was about to walk into the dark, and she had no idea that the predator waiting in the shadows was the sister she thought she had left behind. The quiet peace of my studio felt charged. The brooch was coming back to me, and the mechanism of its return would trigger an implosion that would shatter the Smith family into unrecognizable pieces. The seed I planted took exactly 14 days to break through the soil. 2 weeks of silence passed after my text message. I did not need to be in the room to know what those 14 days looked like for my sister. The architecture of a financial collapse is highly predictable. The first week is denial. Carter likely assured Madison the frozen trust account was a temporary bank error. The second week brings the physical evidence: the country club membership suspension letter arriving in the mail, the credit cards declining at the luxury grocery store, the realization that the life she traded my inheritance to secure was a house of cards built on a swamp. My sarcastic advice echoed in her head until it became a viable strategy. I suggest you sell the sapphire brooch. I learned the precise details of her movements later, piecing them together from security footage, receipts, and the eventual confessions that spilled out when the pressure broke them. But the sequence of events was as logical as a mathematical equation. Madison drove to our parents' colonial on a Tuesday afternoon. The visit was unannounced. She walked through the front door and found Helen pacing the living room, arguing in hushed tones on her cell phone with what she pretended was a difficult contractor, but was actually a debt collector hunting Richard. Helen waved Madison away, distracted by her own mounting crisis. That distraction was all the cover my sister needed. Madison walked down the carpeted hallway and slipped into the master's suite. The air conditioning hummed, cooling the heavy silk drapes. She opened the top drawer of Helen's antique oak dresser. Inside sat a velvet jewelry box, the same box Helen used to hoard the spoils of her fake empire. Madison lifted the lid. Resting on a satin pillow was Grand's platinum sunburst brooch, the piece Helen had kept from the estate sale to use as a bridal prop. Madison did not hesitate. She closed her fingers around the cool metal, slipped the jewelry into her designer handbag, and walked out the front door before Helen even ended her phone call. She thought the hard part was over. She assumed turning an $85,000 heirloom into liquid cash was as simple as handing it across a counter. Her privilege had shielded her from the strict regulations of the high-end resale market. Her first stop was a boutique pawnbroker in an affluent neighboring suburb. She parked her luxury SUV, put on oversized sunglasses, and walked into a showroom smelling of leather polish and desperation. The broker, a cynical man with 3 decades of experience identifying stolen goods, stood behind bulletproof glass. Madison placed the brooch on the velvet appraisal mat. She demanded a quick cash buyout, trying to project the bored impatience of a wealthy socialite liquidating old clutter. The broker picked up his loupe. He examined the intricate mill-grain detailing. He noted the high clarity of the salon sapphires. Then he noticed the missing stone in the bottom right cluster. He set the loupe down and looked at Madison's trembling hands. He asked for the provenance. He wanted the original estate paperwork, the insurance rider, or a certified appraisal document proving she had the legal right to sell a museum-quality piece. Madison stammered. She claimed it was a wedding gift from her mother. She said the paperwork was lost in a move. The broker slid the brooch back across the velvet mat. He operated in a gray area of finance, but he was not suicidal. Taking possession of an unpapered, highly identifiable Art Deco piece from a nervous woman refusing to provide a paper trail was a fast track to a fencing charge. He told her to leave. Madison sat in her car in the parking lot. The Alabama heat beat down on the windshield. Panic narrowed her vision. She could not sell it locally. Word would travel. The pawnbroker might mention the interaction to a colleague. Or worse, someone from the country club might see her car parked outside a cash exchange. She realized her hometown was a liability. She needed a buyer in a different state, someone who dealt in discreet, high-value transactions and catered to desperate wealth. She pulled out her phone and searched the internet for luxury vintage buyers. She bypassed the corporate auction houses, knowing they required weeks of vetting. She scanned the listings in the Buckhead district of Atlanta, 2 hours away, across the state line. She found a sleek website for a boutique specializing in rare estate acquisitions. The owner advertised private consultations and immediate capital for the right pieces. The boutique was named Vivienne Estate Jewelers. Madison put the car in drive and headed toward the interstate. She was running blind, driven by the sheer terror of losing her status. What Madison did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was the hidden architecture of the Southern vintage jewelry market. It is a small, insular ecosystem. The high-end brokers who operate the glamorous storefronts rarely do their own complex restoration work. When they acquire damaged vintage pieces, they route them to specialized, discreet artisans. Vivienne was a seasoned broker with a sharp eye and a ruthless business model. She was also one of Beatrice Heritage's most consistent wholesale partners. Vivienne supplied the raw, damaged acquisitions. O. Smith provided the meticulous restoration that doubled their market value. We had a silent, highly profitable symbiosis. Madison walked into Vivienne's Atlanta showroom at 4 in the afternoon. The boutique was a sanctuary of polished glass and muted lighting. Vivienne stood behind the counter, assessing the frantic energy radiating from the young woman clutching a designer handbag. Madison repeated her performance. She placed the brooch on the counter and asked for an immediate cash offer, citing a sudden need to liquidate personal assets. Vivienne picked up the piece. Her trained eyes registered the exceptional craftsmanship immediately. She also registered the dark void where the bottom right sapphire should have been. A piece this significant, carrying damage, required a specialized valuation before she could risk floating a cash offer. Vivienne offered Madison a polite smile and asked her to wait in the private viewing lounge while she authenticated the metals in the back office. Madison sat on a velvet sofa, breathing a sigh of relief. She thought she had found her escape hatch. She had no idea the floor was about to drop out from under her. 200 miles away, I was sitting at my workbench in Birmingham. The studio was quiet. I was reviewing a supply invoice when my secure work phone chimed. It was an encrypted message from Vivienne. The preview text read, "Walk-in client requesting rapid cash buyout. Breathtaking deco piece, but missing a key stone. Need your structural assessment before I make an offer." I tapped the screen to open the attached image file. The high-resolution photograph loaded pixel by pixel, the platinum setting, the diamond halo, the cluster of salon sapphires, the empty prong on the bottom right side. My lungs stopped working. The air trapped in my throat felt like solid ice. I stared at the glowing screen. I did not need a jeweler's loupe to authenticate the piece. I knew the weight of that metal. I knew the exact dimension of the missing sapphire currently locked in my own heavy steel safe. It was Gran's brooch. The cosmic poetry of the moment pinned me to my chair. Madison had stolen the heirloom from our mother. She had driven across state lines to hide her tracks. She had walked into a random luxury boutique in a city of 5 million people, seeking a ghost buyer who would not ask questions. And she had handed the stolen jewelry directly to the silent partner of the sister she betrayed. She walked right into my trap, and she was sitting in a velvet chair 200 miles away, completely unaware that the jaws had just snapped shut. My hands hovered over the keyboard. The analytical side of my brain took over, pushing the shock aside. Madison was desperate for cash. Vivienne had the piece in her back office. I had the capital. The game was no longer about proving a point. It was about executing a legal checkmate. I did not type out an explanation to Vivienne. I did not reveal my identity or my connection to the nervous girl in her showroom. I needed to control the board. I pressed my fingers to the glass and typed my instructions, setting the terms for a transaction that would rewrite the power dynamic of my family forever. My fingers hovered over the glass screen of my secure work phone. The digital image of Gran's brooch burned into my retinas. I did not take time to process the emotional gravity. The strategist inside my head stepped forward, cold and calculating. I tapped the phone icon next to Vivienne's contact name. The line connected after a single ring. "Oh, Smith," Vivienne said. Her voice carried the polished, hushed tone of a woman standing in a back office while a client waited nearby. "Did you review the file?" "I am looking at it right now," I said. My voice was steady. "Keep her in your showroom. Offer her a beverage. Do whatever you need to do, but stall her. I want to buy the piece." Vivienne paused. "It is a remarkable setting, but the missing sapphire hurts the retail margin. I cannot float a premium payout without a structural assessment." "You are not going to float anything," I replied. "I am wiring the capital from the Beatrice Heritage operating account. You are acting as my proxy. Tell your walk-in client the market is soft for damaged deco pieces. Offer her $22,000, cash." Vivienne let out a low whistle. 22? That is a predatory lowball. A piece like that, even damaged, is worth triple. "She will take it," I said. I knew the exact depth of my sister's panic. She is not looking for fair market value. She is looking for an escape hatch. "Understood," Vivienne said. "I will draft the standard intake receipt." "No," I corrected. "Do not use your boutique paperwork. I am sending you a custom bill of sale. She signs my document or the deal is off." I ended the call. I stood up from my workbench. My joints felt stiff, wired with adrenaline. I walked down the short hallway separating my studio from David's private office. He was sitting behind his desk, analyzing a quarterly tax ledger. He looked up when I entered. I did not speak. I simply turned my phone around and placed it flat on his desk. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the high-resolution photograph. He recognized the piece instantly. He had heard the story on our third date. He knew the exact shape of the heirloom that funded the Mountain Brook illusion. "Is that what I think it is?" David asked. "Madison just walked into my primary wholesale partner's boutique in Atlanta," I said. "She stole it from Helen. She is trying to fence it across state lines. I am buying it back for $22,000, but I need a contract." David pushed his tax ledger aside. The forensic accountant vanished. The architect of my firewall took his place. He pulled a blank legal pad toward him and uncapped his pen. "A standard receipt will not protect you," David said, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the angles. "If Helen discovers the piece is missing, she could report it stolen. If she traces it to you, she will claim you orchestrated the theft. We need to legally sever her claim and shift the entire liability onto your sister." He turned to his computer and opened a blank legal document. His fingers flew across the keys. "I am drafting a specialized bill of sale," David explained, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We are including a bulletproof indemnity clause. The contract will explicitly state that the seller holds sole, unencumbered legal title to the item. It will name the Beatrice Smith estate. By signing this, Madison is legally swearing the brooch belongs to her, and she waives all future claims by herself or her family members." I watched the legal jargon fill the white page. "And if she does not actually own it?" David offered a razor-thin smile. "Then she is committing fraud on paper. If Helen ever tries to sue you for possession, you produce this document. It proves Madison executed an illicit sale under the guise of sole ownership. It pits the two of them against each other. It becomes a Mountain Brook civil war, and you remain a protected third-party buyer." He hit print. The laser printer hummed. David handed me the crisp page. I scanned the dense paragraphs. It was a bear trap crafted from legal terminology. I walked back to my studio, placed the document face down on the scanner, and faxed it directly to Vivian's secure machine. Next, I logged into my commercial banking portal. I initiated a wire transfer for $22,000, routing the funds to Vivian's escrow account. I hit confirm. The money left my ledger. I sat in my chair. The waiting began. I pictured the scene unfolding 200 miles away. Madison sitting on the velvet sofa in the Buckhead showroom. She was likely checking her designer watch, her leg bouncing with nervous energy. She needed the money to cover her tracks, to hide the reality of Carter's frozen trust fund from her country club friends. She was terrified of losing her status. Vivian would walk out of the back office. She would carry a silver tray, placing the brooch and the printed contract on the glass counter. She would deliver the lowball offer with the practiced, detached sympathy of a seasoned broker. $22,000. I knew Madison would flinch. She knew it was worth more. But she had no leverage. She could not walk away and try another shop without risking exposure. The walls were closing in on her. Desperation creates a narrow, blinding tunnel vision. She would see the lifeline and grab it, ignoring the ropes attached. My phone chimed, a text from Vivienne. "Offer accepted. Presenting your paperwork now." My breath caught. This was the final hurdle. If Madison actually read the document, if she saw the words Beatrice Smith Estate or the strict liability clauses, she might panic and run. But people drowning in debt rarely read the fine print. They only look for the signature line standing between them and the oxygen. 5 minutes passed. The quiet in the studio was deafening. The hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. Then, the fax machine in the corner of my office engaged. The digital display lit up. Receiving transmission. I stood up and walked over to the machine. The rollers whirred, pulling a fresh sheet of paper from the tray. The ink printed line by line. I watched the legal jargon David had drafted slide out into the tray. I reached down and pulled the paper free. I looked at the bottom of the page. There, scrawled in black ink, was my sister's signature. Madison Smith. The ink was stark against the white paper. She signed it. She waived every right. She claimed sole ownership of a stolen heirloom and sold it to a ghost buyer to save her own skin. She took the money and walked out of that Atlanta boutique thinking she had executed the perfect crime. She thought she was free. I carried the signed bill of sale to my desk. The paper felt heavy. It possessed a dense, undeniable gravity. I did not buy a piece of jewelry. I bought a confession. I weaponized the very success my family tried to extinguish, using my own clean capital to reclaim the legacy they pawned. I opened the top drawer of my desk and lifted the black leather notebook. I placed it next to the faxed contract. I unfastened the metal clasp. The pages fell open to the timeline of my exile. The empty safe, the kitchen audit, the extortion attempt. I uncapped my blue pen. My hand did not shake. Item 18. The buyback. Bill of sale executed. Grand's brooch acquired for $22,000. Madison Smith signature secured. Indemnity clause active. Date September 16th. I folded the faxed contract in half and tucked it into the pocket on the inside cover of the notebook. I closed the leather binding. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the empty space on my workbench. The sunburst brooch was currently sitting in a secure vault in Atlanta, waiting for an armored courier to transport it home to Birmingham. I had won the silent war. I held the ultimate receipt. But the victory was a quiet one, and the resulting shockwaves were only just beginning to form. Madison had $22,000 in untraceable cash. She would use it to patch the holes in her luxury lifestyle. She would smile at the country club, believing her secret was safe. Meanwhile, back in Mountain Brook, Helen would eventually open her antique dresser drawer. She would lift the lid of her velvet jewelry box and find the satin pillow empty. The theft would turn the mother and the golden child against each other. And Richard, still suffocating under a mountain of offshore gambling debt, was running out of time on his balloon payment. The trap was closed, but the real destruction was heading straight toward my front door. 2 days later, an armored courier truck idled outside my commercial design studio. A uniformed guard stepped through the glass doors, carrying a reinforced steel lockbox. I signed the electronic manifest, accepted the heavy package, and carried it into my private workspace. I locked the door behind me. I set the box on my jeweler bench. The overhead high-intensity lamp cast a stark white circle over the dark wood. I entered the numeric code Vivian provided and popped the dual latches. Inside, resting on a bed of dense charcoal foam, was Grand's platinum sunburst brooch. I sat down and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 years. I picked up the heavy metal piece. The platinum was cool against my skin. The diamonds caught the harsh light, throwing sharp fragments of fire across the room. But my eyes bypassed the brilliance and settled directly on the dark, empty space in the bottom right corner of the sapphire cluster. The wound my mother inflicted when she ripped the boxes from the wall safe in Mountain Brook. I reached into the shallow top drawer of my bench. I pulled out a tiny, transparent glass vial. I unstoppered the cork and tipped the vial over a velvet mat. A single, unheated, 2-carat salon sapphire tumbled out. The exact stone I had extracted from the cream carpet fibers of the in-law suite on the day the theft was discovered. I secured the magnification visor over my eyes. I clamped the brooch into a padded vice block. The empty setting loomed large in my vision. The 4 platinum prongs were slightly bent outward, deformed by the violent force used to drag the box across the safe floor. I picked up a pair of smooth-jawed jeweler pliers. I applied gentle, precise pressure to the metal, coaxing the platinum back into proper alignment. The work required absolute stillness. One slip could snap a prong, ruining the antique setting. I lowered the loose sapphire into the cradle. It settled perfectly into the groove, the faceted pavilion nesting flush against the backing. I used a burnishing tool to push the 4 prongs down over the crown of the stone, locking it into place. A sharp, microscopic click echoed in the quiet room. I lifted the visor. I unclasped the vise. I held the brooch up to the light. It was whole. The blue cluster was unbroken, a perfect, seamless sunburst. The match was irrefutable proof. Nobody could ever claim this was a replica. The DNA of the damage and the exact cut of the recovered stone tied the piece directly to the scene of the crime. I placed the heirloom into a new velvet box and locked it inside my wall safe. The silence in my studio was a stark contrast to the chaos detonating down south. I did not have to guess what was happening in Mountain Brook. The fallout arrived via the public voicemail line for Beatrice Heritage. I had blocked my family on all personal channels, but my business number was listed on the registry. I pressed play on the blinking digital console. The audio filled the room. It was Helen. Her voice was not the polished, commanding tone she used at the country club. It was a frantic, breathless whisper, laced with genuine hysteria. "Olivia, I know you blocked me. I do not care. You need to call me. Someone broke into the house. They bypassed the alarm. They went straight into my bedroom and stole my jewelry box. The police are useless. They are asking questions about the housekeeper, but I know she did not do it. I am missing crucial pieces. I need your help dealing with the insurance adjusters. Please pick up the phone." I leaned against my desk, listening to the recording loop. The irony was exquisite. Helen was suffering the exact same violation she had inflicted upon me. She was staring at an empty space, feeling the distinct, hollow violation of theft. She was tearing her house apart, interrogating innocent domestic workers, waiting for the police to save her. And Madison was sitting right next to her, playing the role of the supportive daughter. I opened a social media application on my desktop and navigated to Madison's public profile. Her latest post featured a photo of a silver tray holding 2 flutes of champagne and a pair of cucumber eye masks. The location tag marked a luxury day spa in the city center. The caption read, "Self-care day to decompress from family stress." Madison was watching our mother unravel, knowing full well she was the architect of the burglary. She had $22,000 of Vivian's cash resting in a new private checking account. She was sipping expensive wine and enjoying spa treatments funded by the very heirloom Helen had stolen to protect her. The sociopathy was breathtaking. They were a circle of predators, finally turning their teeth on each other. I deleted Helen's voicemail. I did not return the call. I let the panic marinate. The pressure inside the Smith family required 1 more week to breach the containment vessel. The extortion letter had failed. The brooch was gone. The offshore bookies were circling Richard, demanding the balloon payment he no longer possessed. The following Tuesday, a heavy rain washed over Birmingham. I was drafting a supply order in my office when my cell phone rang. It was the security kiosk at the main gate of my residential community. "Miss Smith," the guard said. His voice was laced with professional hesitation. "I have a Richard and Helen Smith at the gate. They are requesting access to your residence. They claim it is a family emergency." I stood up. The air in my office turned dense. They had driven 2 hours through a torrential downpour, bypassing legal threats and voicemails to execute a physical ambush. "Do not let them through the residential gate," I instructed. "Direct them to the private lounge in the community clubhouse. I will meet them there." I grabbed my raincoat and an umbrella. I drove my car down the winding, pine-lined roads of the neighborhood. The clubhouse was a sprawling glass and cedar building overlooking a private lake. I parked and walked into the main lobby. The space was deserted, smelling of fresh rain and expensive leather furniture. Richard and Helen were sitting on a wide sofa near the unlit stone fireplace. I stopped walking. The physical deterioration of my parents arrested my attention. Richard looked 10 years older than the man who had scolded me in the kitchen 3 years ago. His tailored polo shirt hung loose over a shrinking frame. His skin carried a gray, unhealthy pallor, and his hands rested on his knees, trembling with a subtle, rhythmic tremor. Helen sat beside him, stripped of her usual armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, messy knot. She wore a simple trench coat, her posture lacking the rigid, socialite spine she usually weaponized. They looked like what they were, bankrupt. I walked over and stood near the edge of the glass coffee table. I did not sit down. I did not offer a greeting. Helen looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot. "Olivia, thank God. We did not know if you would actually come down." "State your business," I said. My voice was a flat, unyielding line. Richard cleared his throat. He avoided my gaze, choosing to stare at the rug beneath my boots. "The legal letter I sent," he began, his voice raspy. "That was a mistake. A misunderstanding orchestrated by aggressive counsel. I apologize for the stress it caused you." I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to hear the pathetic, hollow ring of his own lie. "We are in a bind, Olivia," Richard continued, finally lifting his head. The bank is initiating foreclosure proceedings on the house in Mountain Brook. I suffered a series of catastrophic setbacks with some private investments. The market turned against me. If I do not wire a massive sum by Friday, they are seizing the property. I crossed my arms. How much? $60,000, Helen blurted out. The desperation cracked her voice. We need $60,000, Olivia. We know Beatrice Heritage is thriving. We know you have the capital. It would be a loan, a family investment. We will pay you back with interest once the market corrects itself. I looked at the two of them. They were begging for $60,000 to save the house where they hosted the fake wedding, the house where they gaslit me. They were standing on the edge of the abyss, asking the daughter they discarded to serve as their financial bridge. The supreme irony anchored my feet to the floor. They needed $60,000. Madison was secretly sitting on $22,000 of their own stolen assets. If they possessed an ounce of actual family loyalty, Madison could have handed them the spa money to stall the bank. But Madison chose herself. My mother and father were drowning, and their golden child was watching from the shore, refusing to throw the life preserver she had stolen from their own boat. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I did not feel the lingering ache of the scapegoat. I felt the precise, cold calculation of an auditor closing a fraudulent account. I looked at Richard. I looked at Helen. I am not a bank, I said. Helen stood up, her hands balled into fists at her sides. You cannot just turn your back on us. We raised you. We provided for you. You are going to let your childhood home go to the highest bidder over a petty grudge? I stepped closer to the glass table. The grudge is not petty, Mom. It is an $85,000 deficit. You stole my future to fund a party. You watched Dad gamble away the proceeds. You sent a lawyer to extort my business. I turned away from them and walked toward the lobby doors. You stole from me, I said over my shoulder, the words echoing off the high cedar ceiling. And I do not finance thieves. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped out into the rain. I did not look back. The tension behind me was a boiling, volatile mass. I had severed their final lifeline. The Mountain Brook illusion was officially dead. The foreclosure was inevitable. But the true, devastating reality of their collapse was waiting in the shadows. David and I had one final card to play, a strategic maneuver that would ensure my parents would not just lose their house, but they would lose it directly to the daughter they tried to erase. The rain pelted the roof of my car as I drove back to the studio. The encounter in the clubhouse lobby played on a continuous loop in my mind. I had watched the architects of my exile beg for mercy. The closure should have felt absolute, but toxic systems rarely collapse cleanly. They splinter, generating shrapnel. I knew my parents would return to Mountain Brook, desperate and cornered, and unleash that desperation on whoever stood closest. That person was Madison. The implosion was guaranteed, but I needed to ensure I was insulated from the blast radius. I parked behind the design studio and keyed my security code into the heavy steel door. I walked down the corridor toward David's office. The door was ajar. He was standing near a large white dry erase board, a black marker in his hand. The board was covered in a complex web of financial data, an updated map of Richard Smith's ruin. David turned as I entered. He assessed my damp raincoat and the rigid set of my shoulders. He set the marker down. They ambushed the community gate, I said, shedding my coat and hanging it on a brass hook. They asked for $60,000 to halt the foreclosure on the house. David nodded, unsurprised. Extortion failed, so they pivoted to charity. Did you give them anything? I gave them directions to the exit, I replied. David offered a brief, satisfied smile. He turned back to the whiteboard and tapped the tip of his marker against a large circle drawn in the upper right quadrant. The house foreclosure is the least of his problems, David said, his voice dropping into the clinical cadence of a forensic audit. Richard's personal debt is tied directly to his commercial holdings. I spent the morning reviewing the municipal bankruptcy dockets. The regional bank holding the mortgage on Richard's primary commercial building, the warehouse facility his logistics company leases, is quietly liquidating distressed assets to balance their quarterly ledgers. I walked closer to the board. The warehouse facility was the crown jewel of Richard's remaining professional pride. It was the physical location of his failing logistics company. What does that mean for him? I asked. It means the bank is selling his commercial debt to third-party liquidators for pennies on the dollar, David explained. They want the bad paper off their books. Whoever buys that commercial note becomes Richard's new landlord. They gain the power to call in the debt, renegotiate the lease, or initiate an immediate commercial eviction. The air in the office shifted. The quiet hum of the building seemed to pause, waiting for the implication to land. I stared at the numbers on the whiteboard, the principal, the interest, the liquidation value. My mind began to calculate. Beatrice Heritage had just closed the most profitable quarter in its history. The Victorian Collection acquisition was already generating massive returns from private buyers in New York and London. We possessed significant, highly liquid capital resting in corporate accounts. I looked at David. His eyes met mine. He knew exactly what I was thinking. The forensic accountant and the jeweler were operating on the exact same wavelength. "How much is the bank asking for the distressed paper?" I asked. My voice was a hushed, dangerous whisper. David wrote a figure on the whiteboard. It was a fraction of the building's actual value, but it was still a substantial sum. "Can we clear it without compromising the operating budget for the studio?" I pressed. David pulled up a spreadsheet on his monitor. He ran a rapid stress test on our current liquidity. He hit enter. The cells flashed green. "We can cover the acquisition," David confirmed, "but we cannot purchase it under the Beatrice Heritage umbrella. If Richard's legal counsel sees your corporate entity listed as the new creditor, they will file an injunction claiming a conflict of interest or harassment. We need an opaque barrier. Set up a blind limited liability company," I instructed. "Register it in Delaware. Use a registered agent service to mask the ownership hierarchy. Call it something generic. Apex Holdings." David's fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating the corporate formation protocols. "I will contact the regional bank's liquidation officer this afternoon. We will offer a cash buyout on the commercial note. Banks love fast, unencumbered liquidity. The ink will be dry by Friday." I leaned against the door frame, watching him work. The poetic justice of the maneuver was staggering. Richard Smith had spent his entire life valuing property and status above his own daughter. He had stolen my inheritance to preserve his image. Now I was using the wealth generated from the ashes of that theft to quietly purchase the ground beneath his feet. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was legally becoming his primary creditor. I would own the walls of his failing empire. The next 3 weeks moved with the relentless speed of an incoming tide. Apex Holdings successfully acquired the commercial debt. The paperwork was finalized, sealed, and buried beneath layers of Delaware corporate privacy laws. Richard Smith received a standard legal notice informing him his mortgage had been sold to a new holding company. He had no idea the new landlord possessed my face. While the trap secured itself in the background, my focus shifted to the impending climax of the social season. November brought the annual Heritage Foundation Charity Gala in Atlanta. It was the premier luxury event of the year, a sprawling, opulent gathering of the Southern elite. Philanthropists, generational wealth families, and major corporate players converged in the grand ballroom of a historic downtown hotel. This year, the gala carried a distinct significance for me. The foundation had unanimously selected Beatrice Heritage as the premier corporate sponsor. It was the ultimate validation of my brand. For 3 years, I had operated behind the anonymous moniker of O. Smith. I had built the fortress in the shadows. The gala was the moment I chose to lower the drawbridge and step into the light. I secured a custom emerald green silk gown. I arranged for David to attend as my escort. I prepared a brief, elegant speech to deliver from the main podium. The logistics were flawless. What I did not anticipate was the sheer magnetic pull of desperation radiating from Mountain Brook. A former high school acquaintance, someone who occasionally updated me on the town gossip despite my strict boundaries, sent an email 2 days before the event. The message contained a screenshot of a country club newsletter. Helen Smith was hustling. The foreclosure on the family home was looming. The commercial business was bleeding cash. Helen was backed into a corner, terrified of losing her social standing. She knew the Atlanta Gala was a concentration of extreme wealth. She viewed the event as a hunting ground, a place to corner a wealthy investor or secure a massive, high-interest personal loan from a sympathetic peer. According to the newsletter Gossip, Helen had spent an entire week badgering an elderly, prominent country club board member. She feigned an intense interest in the foundation's charity work, leveraging years of fake friendship to beg for 2 pity tickets to the sold-out event. She succeeded. She secured the entry passes, and she was not attending alone. Madison was joining her. Carter, stripped of his trust fund and facing the reality of a working-class existence, had filed for a legal separation. Madison was suddenly a soon-to-be divorced woman standing on the edge of a financial cliff. She was accompanying our mother to Atlanta with a singular predatory focus. She was hunting for a new benefactor, a replacement sugar daddy to fund the lifestyle she believed she deserved. I sat in my office, staring at the email. The universe possesses a terrifying, precise sense of irony. Helen and Madison were driving 2 hours across state lines. They were walking into a room filled with the most powerful people in the South, desperate to beg for scraps to save their fake empire. They had absolutely no idea who was hosting the party. They were walking straight into the epicenter of my newly built world. They were walking into a room where I held the microphone, I controlled the narrative, and I possessed the very receipts that would detonate their remaining dignity. I closed my laptop. I stood up and smoothed the fabric of my work trousers. I walked to the heavy steel wall safe in my studio. I entered the code and opened the heavy door. I bypassed the trays of raw diamonds and the velvet rolls of gold chains. I reached for a specific, dark blue velvet box resting on the top shelf. I opened the lid. Grand's platinum sunburst brooch rested against the satin, the newly restored salon sapphire gleaming under the overhead lights. The gala was 2 days away. The final collision was inevitable. I was going to wear the undeniable proof of their theft pinned directly over my heart. The visual shock would paralyze them. But the real devastation would happen in the quiet, private boardroom after the applause faded, when the blind holding company and the stolen jewelry converged to deliver the ultimate, inescapable reckoning. The grand ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel was a cathedral of extreme wealth. Crystal chandeliers, heavy as small cars, threw warm, fractured light across the gold-leafed vaulted ceilings. The air was thick with the scent of expensive orchids and imported perfume. Waiters in crisp black tuxedo jackets moved silently through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with top-shelf champagne and caviar. This was not the performative, frantic luxury of Mountain Brook. This was generational Atlanta money. It was quiet, deep, and heavily insulated. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtain flanking the main stage. I smoothed the heavy silk of my emerald green gown. My hands were perfectly steady. I did not feel the nervous flutter of a scapegoat returning to face her abusers. I felt the cold, anchored certainty of a woman who owned the ground she stood on. David stood beside me, immaculate in a midnight blue tuxedo. He checked the matte black face of his watch. 2 minutes, he murmured, his voice a low, calming rumble beneath the noise of the ballroom. I nodded. I reached up and adjusted the heavy platinum piece pinned to the structured bodice of my gown, Grand's sunburst brooch. The cluster of salon sapphires felt heavy against my collarbone. It was a beacon, a trap, a receipt forged in metal and stone. I peered through a small gap in the heavy velvet curtain, scanning the crowded floor. I found them almost immediately. Helen and Madison were standing near a towering floral arrangement by the east bar. They looked like what they were, desperate outsiders trying to blend into a room they did not belong in. Helen wore a black evening gown that was tailored impeccably, but felt 5 years out of date. Her posture was rigid, a frantic, vibrating tension humming beneath her pearls. She was aggressively cornering a senior partner of an Atlanta investment firm, attempting to pitch Richard's failing logistics company, disguised as a casual networking conversation. The investment partner looked polite but trapped, his eyes scanning the room for an exit strategy. Madison hovered near her mother, holding a champagne flute like a shield. She wore a blush pink designer dress, likely purchased during her final frantic shopping spree before Carter's accounts were frozen. Her eyes darted rapidly across the room, tracking the movements of wealthy, older men. She was hunting. She was a woman on the edge of a financial cliff, searching for a golden parachute to catch her before the divorce finalized. They were drinking free champagne. They were hustling. They had absolutely no idea that the event they were desperately trying to exploit was funded entirely by the daughter they discarded. The low hum of conversations died down as the house lights dimmed. A single, powerful spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the grand mahogany podium at the center of the stage. The gala announcer, a prominent local news anchor with a deep, resonant voice, tapped the microphone. The feedback hissed softly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer began, his voice echoing across the silent ballroom, "tonight we celebrate the preservation of history and the power of philanthropic dedication. Our premier sponsor this evening represents the pinnacle of craftsmanship and integrity. They have not only restored some of the most significant vintage collections in the South, but they have also anchored tonight's massive charitable donation." I took a slow, deep breath. The velvet curtain felt heavy against my knuckles. "Please join me in welcoming the founder and chief executive officer of Beatrice Heritage," the announcer continued, "Miss Olivia Smith." The heavy curtain pulled back. I stepped out of the shadows and walked into the blinding circle of the spotlight. The applause started instantly, a polite, rolling thunder from 300 guests. I walked to the mahogany podium. The heels of my shoes clicked softly against the polished hardwood stage. I placed my hands on the edges of the podium and looked out across the sea of faces. My eyes immediately found the East Bar. I watched the exact moment the acoustic shockwave hit my mother. Helen stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth fell open. The polite networking smile she was directing at the investment partner melted off her face, replaced by a mask of absolute, uncomprehending horror. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her slack fingers. It hit the marble floor, shattering into a dozen sharp fragments. The loud crash turned the heads of the surrounding guests, but Helen did not notice the breach of etiquette. She was paralyzed. Madison flinched at the sound of the breaking glass. She turned her head toward the stage. I watched the blood drain rapidly from my sister's face. The blush pink of her dress suddenly looked pale against her ashen skin. I did not break eye contact with them. I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," I said, my voice carrying clear and strong across the room. My grandmother, Beatrice, taught me a crucial lesson when I was a child. She taught me to look past the sparkle. She taught me that the true value of any structure is found in its integrity, not in its surface polish. I watched Helen grab the edge of the bar to steady herself. Her knees literally buckled under the weight of the revelation. The daughter she threw away. The daughter she called a jealous spinster. The daughter her husband tried to extort for $50,000. That daughter was currently commanding a room of billionaires. That daughter was the CEO of a luxury empire. But the visual shock was not complete. I saw Madison's gaze drop from my face to the structured bodice of my emerald gown. I saw her eyes lock onto the heavy platinum piece pinned over my heart, the sapphire sunburst. Madison physically recoiled, stumbling a half-step backward. She grabbed her mother's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the black fabric of Helen's gown. I watched Madison whisper something frantic into her mother's ear. Helen's eyes darted to the brooch. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The panic radiating from the East Bar was almost palpable. Helen knew the piece was stolen from her bedroom. Madison knew she had fenced it to a stranger in Atlanta for $22,000. Neither of them understood how the hell it ended up pinned to my chest. The cognitive dissonance short-circuited their brains. They were staring at a ghost. I delivered the rest of my brief speech smoothly. I thanked the foundation. I highlighted the charitable goals of the evening. I spoke about the importance of restoring broken things. I did not mention my family. I did not need to. My presence was a total, devastating eradication of their narrative. Thank you, and enjoy the evening, I concluded. The applause swelled again, louder this time. I stepped back from the podium. David was waiting for me at the edge of the stage. He offered a tight, proud smile. He placed a hand on the small of my back, guiding me down the carpeted stairs and onto the main floor. The crowd parted smoothly, offering polite congratulations and murmurs of respect. I nodded gracefully, moving through the gauntlet of wealth. Helen and Madison intercepted me near the main foyer. They shoved past a startled waiter, abandoning any pretense of country club decorum. Helen reached out, her fingers trembling wildly, attempting to grab my arm. I smoothly stepped out of her reach. David moved forward slightly, positioning his shoulder as a physical barrier between my mother and me. "Olivia," Helen gasped. Her chest heaved. The smell of stale champagne and sour panic rolled off her. "What is this? What are you doing here? How are you the sponsor?" I looked down at her. She looked small. The sprawling, terrifying matriarch of my childhood was gone, replaced by a terrified woman drowning in a dress she could not afford. Madison pushed forward, ignoring David's warning glare. Her eyes were wild, locked entirely on my chest. "Where did you get that?" Madison hissed. Her voice was shrill, desperate. "That was stolen. Someone broke into the house and stole that." I looked at my sister. The girl who sold my future. The girl who thought she executed the perfect crime. I did not yell. I did not create a scene in the foyer of the Biltmore Hotel. My voice was like ice, a cold, flat, undeniable reality. "I bought it," I said. Madison's mouth snapped shut. "I bought it from a very desperate woman who needed $22,000 in cash to hide her bankruptcy," I continued softly, aiming the words directly into Madison's core. Helen whipped her head toward Madison, confusion fighting with a sudden, dark suspicion. What is she talking about? Madison, what is she talking about? Madison took another step backward, shaking her head rapidly. "I do not know. She is lying. She is lying." I tapped the face of the sapphire brooch with my index finger. The metal clicked. "I am not having this conversation in a hallway," I said, silencing them both. "If you want to know how the ledger balances, meet me in the private executive boardroom on the second floor in exactly 10 minutes. Bring your checkbooks." I turned away, leaving them gasping in the foyer. The visual shock had successfully paralyzed them. The cognitive dissonance had turned the mother against the golden child. But the true audit was waiting upstairs. The Atlanta Gala was merely the stage setting. The private boardroom was where I intended to drop the final, inescapable receipt, locking the trap shut on the Smith family forever. The executive boardroom on the second floor of the Biltmore felt like a tomb. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling, noisy opulence of the ballroom below. The walls were paneled in dark walnut. The ceiling was low, pressing down on the long, heavy oak table occupying the center of the room. A single, focused pendant light illuminated the polished wood grain, casting the rest of the space into deep shadow. I took the leather armchair at the head of the table. The seat was firm. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald gown and placed my structured handbag on the wood surface. David stood 3 feet behind my right shoulder. He crossed his arms over his chest, adopting the relaxed, immovable posture of a palace guard. He was the architect of the financial trap waiting to spring, and he watched the heavy double doors with clinical anticipation. Exactly 8 minutes passed. The heavy brass handle turned. Helen and Madison pushed through the doors. The fight had drained out of them during the elevator ride. They looked like cornered prey, breathing shallowly, their eyes darting around the dim room, searching for an exit they knew they could not use. Helen moved first. Her survival instinct kicked in, triggering the only defense mechanism she knew, the fake country club pivot. She walked toward the table, forcing a brittle, ghastly smile onto her face. Her hands gripped the back of an empty leather chair. "Olivia," she said, her voice shaking slightly, betraying the forced maternal pride, "I am in shock. I always knew you possessed potential, but this is magnificent. Beatrice heritage. You built an empire right under our noses. This changes everything. We can merge Richard's logistics company with your corporate umbrella. We can weather this storm together. Family saves family." I stared at her. The delusion was almost admirable. She was standing in the ashes of the bridge she burned, trying to sell me a toll ticket to cross the river. Madison did not play along. The golden child did not possess her mother's ability to compartmentalize. Madison was vibrating with panic. She bypassed the empty chairs and marched toward my end of the table. She pointed a trembling finger directly at the platinum sunburst brooch pinned to my gown. "You stole that from me," Madison hissed. Her voice cracked, soaring into a frantic register. "I do not care how much money you have. You broke into the house in Mountain Brook and stole it. I am calling the police. I am having you arrested." I did not flinch. I did not yell. The time for arguing was over 3 years ago. I reached into my structured handbag. My fingers brushed past my wallet and closed around the cool, familiar texture. I pulled the black leather notebook out of the bag. I placed it flat on the heavy oak table. The dull thud echoed in the quiet room. Helen stopped smiling. Her eyes dropped to the black cover. "What is that?" she asked, the forced warmth bleeding out of her voice. I unfastened the metal clasp. The click was sharp. I opened the cover. "This is the ledger," I said quietly. "This is the exact accounting of what this family cost me." Madison took a half step backward, her pointing finger dropping to her side. I flipped to the first page. I did not look at them. I looked at the blue ink. "Item 1, I read aloud, my voice steady, delivering the words like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "October 14th, the wall safe in Grand Suite is emptied hours after the will reading. The 8-piece vintage collection, legally bequeathed to me and valued at $85,000, is stolen. The theft is executed using the master key. The master key held exclusively by Helen Smith." Helen gasped. "Olivia, you cannot possibly." "Item 2, I continued, cutting her off. "November 3rd. 7 pieces of the collection are fenced at Silas Thorne's estate brokerage. Total liquid payout secured by Helen Smith, $72,000, paid in untraceable cash. The broker ledger is photographed and archived. The sapphire brooch is retained for aesthetic purposes." Madison turned her head slowly, looking at Helen. "Mom, you sold them." Helen gripped the leather chair. Her knuckles turned white. "It was a necessity. I told you, Gran was confused. We needed the capital to secure your future." I flipped the page. The rustle of the paper was loud. "Item 3, I read. November 12th, the kitchen audit. I present the broker ledger. I am told I am a jealous spinster. I am told I do not deserve the $85,000 nest egg because I am single. My inheritance is dismissed as collateral damage for a country club wedding. I execute the silent exodus." Helen slammed her hand against the chair. "That is the past, Olivia. We were under immense pressure. People say things they do not mean when they are stressed. You cannot hold on to this petty bitterness forever. We are your blood." I ignored her. I flipped to the next section. Item 8, April 22nd, the wedding day manipulation. A text message arrives from an alternate number. It weaponizes an empty chair in the second row, attempting to force my compliance through public shame. I turned the page again. The speed of the audit was increasing, pushing them backward. Item 10, August 28th. A fraudulent cease and desist letter arrives via certified mail. Richard Smith threatens a public civil lawsuit claiming financial elder abuse. He attempts to extort $50,000 from Beatrice Heritage to keep the matter out of court. Helen's jaw dropped. Richard sent you an extortion letter? He was desperate, I said, looking up from the notebook, pinning my mother with a cold stare. He needed the $50,000 to cover the interest payment on his offshore gambling debts, the same debts you paid down using the $72,000 you fenced at Silas Thorne's shop. Madison staggered. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug. She caught herself on the edge of the oak table. She looked at Helen, her eyes wide with total, shattering disbelief. Gambling debts, Madison whispered. The golden child illusion was fracturing right in front of me. You told me the jewelry money paid for the wedding. You told me Gran wanted me to have the perfect day. I did not let Helen answer. I was not finished. Item 11, I read, tapping the blue ink. Financial forensics confirm the entire $100,000 wedding was funded by 5 maxed-out consumer credit cards. The liquid cash from the stolen jewelry was diverted entirely to unregulated sports books. The perfect wedding was a smokescreen, a distraction to hide a failing patriarch. Madison covered her mouth with both hands. A ragged, tearing sob ripped out of her throat. Her entire identity, the foundation of her marriage to Carter, the superiority she wielded like a weapon, it was all built on a massive, humiliating lie. Her wedding was not a celebration. It was a cover-up. Helen was shaking. Her face was gray. Olivia, please, stop. I am begging you. Stop reading. I am not here for an emotional reconciliation, Mom, I said. I closed the notebook, keeping my thumb wedged between the final pages. I am here to close out the accounts. You both walked into this hotel tonight looking for a savior. You thought you could find a wealthy Mark to plug the holes in your sinking ship. I looked at Madison. And you, I said. You stole the brooch from your mother's dresser because Carter lost his allowance and you were terrified of looking poor. You drove 2 hours to Atlanta to pawn a stolen heirloom to a stranger. Madison flinched, the tears spilling over her mascara. I had to. I was losing the house. I pulled my thumb out of the notebook. I opened to page 18. I slid my fingers into the pocket on the inside cover. I pulled out a crisp, folded piece of white paper. The audit was over. The emotional devastation was complete. Now it was time to execute the legal checkmate. It was time to show them the trap they had walked blindly into, a trap forged from their own greed, a trap that would trigger the final explosive implosion of the Smith family. I placed the folded paper on the heavy oak table and slowly pushed it across the wood, aiming it directly at my sister. The crisp white paper slid across the polished oak table, coming to a halt directly in front of Madison. The silence in the executive boardroom was absolute. It was the heavy, pressurized quiet that precedes a detonation. Madison looked down at the document. Her mascara was smeared beneath her eyes, dark tracks cutting through the pale, panicked skin of her cheeks. She focused on the top margin, the bold black text reading, Vivian Estate Jewelers. Then her eyes tracked down to the bottom of the page, to the signature line, her own signature, scrawled in frantic, desperate ink. Helen leaned forward, bracing her weight against the back of the leather chair. She squinted in the dim light, trying to read the text upside down. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice a brittle, fraying wire. "What did you give her?" I did not answer, Helen. I kept my eyes locked on my sister. "Read it," I commanded. Madison swallowed hard. Her voice emerged as a ragged, terrified whisper. "It is a bill of sale for the sapphire brooch." Helen's head snapped toward Madison. The confusion warped rapidly into a dark, predatory suspicion. "A bill of sale? What are you talking about? You told me the house was burglarized. You told me someone broke in while I was on the phone with the contractor." Madison shrank back, trying to distance herself from the paper on the table. Mom, please, I can explain. I did not let her explain. I was closing the ledger. She did not lose the brooch, I said, aiming the words like a precise surgical strike. She stole it from your antique dresser while you were pacing the living room. She drove to Atlanta. She walked into a boutique owned by my primary wholesale partner, and she sold my grandmother's heirloom to a ghost buyer for $22,000 in cash. The air rushed out of Helen's lungs in a violent, audible gasp. $22,000, Helen repeated, her voice rising, shaking the walnut panels. You had $22,000 in cash. Madison held her hands up, palms out, a futile gesture of surrender. Carter froze the accounts. We were going to lose the house. I needed the money, Mom. You gave the brooch to me. It was mine to sell. Helen exploded. The country club facade shattered, revealing the raw, vicious desperation beneath. It was not yours to sell. It was collateral. Your father and I drove 2 hours in a torrential downpour to beg your sister for $60,000 to save the family home from foreclosure. We humiliated ourselves in that clubhouse lobby, and you were sitting on $22,000 of liquid cash the entire time. You watched me tear the house apart looking for that jewelry box. You watched me cry. You spent that money on spa days and designer dresses while we were drowning. Madison pushed back, the tears vanishing, replaced by a defensive, feral snarl. Do not lecture me about stealing. You stole the entire collection from Liv. You lied to everyone. You told me Gran wanted me to have the perfect day. You told me the estate money paid for the wedding. I leaned forward in my chair. The final narrative needed to be corrected. The golden child illusion required total eradication. She did not pay for your wedding, Madison, I said. My voice cut through their screaming match, cold and precise. The $100,000 spectacle you paraded around Mountain Brook was funded entirely by consumer credit cards. 5 separate lines of credit, maxed out, to pay the florist, the caterer, and the string quartet. Madison whipped her head toward me, the betrayal rewriting the geography of her face. What? I pointed at Helen. The $72,000 she got from fencing the rest of Gran's jewelry. The money she claimed was an investment in your future. It never touched your wedding budget. She wired every single dollar to offshore accounts to pay down Richard's catastrophic sports gambling debts. Your perfect day was not a gift. It was a smokescreen, a distraction to convince the town the Smith family was solvent while they secretly fed my inheritance to a bookie. Madison stared at Helen, her mouth open, the full weight of the manipulation crashing down upon her. You used my wedding to hide Dad's gambling. You used me. Helen lunged forward, slamming her hands flat onto the oak table. I protected this family. I protected our reputation. You have no idea the pressure I was under. We built this life for you, Madison. You built a lie, Madison screamed, her voice echoing violently off the low ceiling. You are bankrupt. Dad is an addict. Carter is divorcing me because he realized we are nothing but a massive fraud. I sat back in my chair and watched them tear each other apart. The loyalty they preached for 29 years was a myth. It was never a family. It was a syndicate built on shared greed. The moment the capital dried up, the moment the illusion cracked, they turned their teeth on each other without hesitation. They were 2 desperate women fighting over the ashes of an empire that did not exist. The screaming continued for another 3 minutes. Accusations, vicious insults, years of buried resentments surfacing in a torrent of toxic rage. David shifted slightly behind me. He did not speak, but the slight movement was a signal. The emotional implosion was complete. It was time to execute the legal destruction. I picked up the black leather notebook. The heavy clasp clicked shut. The sound was sharp enough to slice through their argument. Helen and Madison stopped yelling. They turned toward me, their chests heaving, their faces flushed and streaked with ruined makeup. The math is settled, I said quietly. You sold my future to fund her wedding, and she sold your stolen heirlooms to fund her lifestyle. The debt is paid." Helen wiped a frantic hand across her forehead, smearing her foundation. She looked at me, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning in her bloodshot eyes. She looked at the bill of sale sitting in front of Madison. She looked at the sapphire brooch pinned to my gown. "You bought it back," Helen whispered, her voice trembling. "You knew Madison was the seller. You orchestrated the entire transaction." "I did," I confirmed. "I wired the $22,000 from my corporate account. I set the trap, and my sister walked right into it." Helen's posture collapsed. The fight drained out of her, replaced by the sheer terror of total ruin. She grabbed the edge of the table, leaning toward me, the desperation morphing into a pathetic, groveling plea. "Olivia, please," Helen begged. Her voice cracked. "You have the money. You have the business. You won. But they are foreclosing on the house on Friday. Richard's logistics company is failing. The bank is going to lock the doors to the warehouse. We will have absolutely nothing. You are our blood. You have to help us." I looked at the woman who told me I did not deserve a safety net because I was single, the woman who threatened to ban me from a wedding funded by my own stolen inheritance. I reached into my structured handbag one last time. I bypassed my wallet. I bypassed my keys. My fingers closed around a thick, folded legal document printed on heavy ivory bond paper. I pulled it out and placed it on the table. I slid it across the polished oak, aiming it directly at my mother. "I cannot stop the foreclosure on the house in Mountain Brook," I said. "But Richard does not have to worry about the regional bank locking the doors to his commercial warehouse." Helen stared at the ivory paper. Her hands were shaking too violently to pick it up. "What is this?" she asked, the dread suffocating her words. I leaned forward. "The bank sold Richard's distressed commercial mortgage to a private holding company in Delaware last week." Helen blinked, struggling to process the corporate terminology through her panic. "A holding company? Who?" I tapped the thick ivory paper. "Apex Holdings," I said. "A blind, limited liability corporation funded entirely by the capital reserves of Beatrice heritage." The silence in the room became absolute. The air conditioning hummed. A single drop of sweat rolled down the side of Helen's face. "You," Helen whispered, her voice devoid of any remaining strength. "I am your new landlord, Mom," I said. "I own the commercial note. I own the building. I own the walls of Richard's logistics company. And because he is 3 months delinquent on the balloon payment, he is in material breach of the lease agreement." I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald gown. I picked up my black leather notebook and slid it into my handbag. "The commercial eviction notice arrives on Monday morning," I said, looking down at the 2 women sitting in the wreckage of their own greed. "You have 72 hours to clear the property." I turned away from the table. David stepped back, opening the heavy brass door for me. I walked out of the boardroom, the click of my heels echoing down the carpeted hallway, leaving my mother and sister locked in a tomb of their own making. The checkmate was total. The legal destruction was irrefutable. But the final piece of this story does not end in a hotel hallway. It ends where true wealth actually lives. The heavy brass door clicked shut, severing the connection. The thick walnut panels of the boardroom muffled the sounds of my mother and sister turning on each other. Their voices degraded into a dull, rhythmic thud echoing behind us. I did not pause to listen. I walked down the carpeted hallway of the Biltmore Hotel, my posture relaxed, the heavy weight of a 3-year debt finally lifting from my shoulders. David walked beside me. He did not ask if I was okay. He knew the answer. We stepped into the elevator and watched the brass floor indicator slide downward. The doors opened to the main lobby. The gala was still thriving in the grand ballroom, the string quartet playing a bright, cheerful waltz. We walked right past the entrance, through the glass revolving doors, and out into the cool, damp Atlanta night. The rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective under the streetlights. The drive back to Birmingham was quiet. We did not play the radio. We did not discuss the confrontation. The silence in the car was not tense or loaded with unsaid words. It was the clear, deep stillness that follows a long storm. The ledger was balanced. The accounts were closed. The epilogue moved with the ruthless, mechanical efficiency of the American legal system. Monday morning arrived crisp and bright. At exactly 8 o'clock, a process server, accompanied by a local sheriff deputy, pulled into the parking lot of Richard Smith Logistics. They walked up to the main entrance. The deputy taped a formal commercial eviction notice to the glass doors. A locksmith, hired by Apex Holdings, followed closely behind. He drilled out the old cylinders and installed new, heavy-duty deadbolts. The warehouse was secured. Richard arrived 30 minutes later to find his employees standing in the parking lot and his life's work locked behind steel. He had no legal recourse. He was a tenant in default. The commercial collapse triggered the final personal ruin. The regional bank executed the foreclosure on the colonial house in Mountain Brook. The sprawling lawn, the custom white cabinetry, the Calcutta marble island where Helen drank her sweet tea and gaslit me. It all reverted to bank ownership. 2 weeks later, an estate liquidation company hosted a public auction on the front lawn. I did not attend, but the details trickled through the grapevine. Strangers walked through the grand hallways, picking over the remnants of Helen's fake empire. They bought her crystal glassware for pennies. They purchased the velvet bar stools from the kitchen. The country club facade was dismantled piece by piece and carried away in the trunks of minivans. My parents packed whatever fit into a rented moving truck. They relocated to a cramped, 2-bedroom condominium in a neighboring working-class town. The country club board politely suggested Richard resign his membership, citing his delinquent dues. The social circle that Helen had spent her entire adult life cultivating evaporated overnight. She became a ghost, a woman wearing faded pearls, pushing her own cart through a discount grocery store, ignored by the people who used to attend her dinner parties. Madison experienced a different kind of freefall. Carter filed the divorce papers the same week the warehouse locks were changed. His family lawyers were brutal and efficient. They drafted a separation agreement that highlighted Madison's lack of personal assets. The trust fund was shielded. The luxury cars were returned to the dealership. Madison walked away from her brief marriage with 2 suitcases of designer clothes and a shattered ego. She moved into a small apartment she could barely afford. The reality of a frozen bank account forces a rapid shift in perspective. Madison had to find employment. Her resume was blank, consisting only of social engagements and a brief stint planning her own fraudulent wedding. She secured a position at a high-end retail boutique in a prominent outdoor shopping center. The universe delivered its own quiet justice. She spent her days standing on hard tile floors, folding cashmere sweaters and organizing display tables. She wore a uniform name tag. She was forced to offer polite, subservient smiles to the wealthy women who browsed the racks. Occasionally, a former bridesmaid or a country club acquaintance would walk through the glass doors. Madison had to lower her eyes, ring up their purchases, and hand them their shopping bags. She was no longer the VIP guest. She was the staff. I did not gloat. I did not drive past the retail boutique to watch her fold clothes. I did not search public records for the deed to my parents' new condominium. Revenge is a reactive emotion, and I was no longer reacting to them. I was simply living. 6 months passed. Spring returned to Alabama. I stood in my design studio on a Tuesday morning. The floor-to-ceiling windows let in a flood of natural sunlight, warming the wide planks of the hardwood floor. The air smelled of clean metal and fresh coffee. Beatrice Heritage was expanding again, preparing to open a second consultation office in Nashville. David was in his private suite, reviewing the architectural blueprints for the new space. I wore a thick canvas apron over my work clothes. I stood at my jeweler bench, adjusting the magnification visor over my eyes. A raw, unpolished diamond rested in the center of my velvet mat. It was a beautiful stone, full of potential, waiting to be shaped into something permanent. I opened the shallow drawer of my workbench. I reached past the polishing cloths and the silver pliers. My fingers brushed against the black leather notebook. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. The leather felt cool. I ran my thumb over the metal clasp. This book had served as my armor, my ledger, and my roadmap through the darkest chapter of my life. It held the receipts of every lie, every theft, and every manipulation. It was the blueprint of my survival. I did not need it anymore. The threat was neutralized. The fortress was secure. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, a deep filing cabinet designated for archived tax documents and old blueprints. I placed the black notebook in the very back, sliding it behind a stack of manila folders. I closed the drawer. I took a small brass key from my pocket, inserted it into the lock, and turned it. The mechanism clicked into place. I put the key away. I looked down at my canvas apron. Pinned securely to the thick fabric, right above my heart, was Grand's platinum sunburst brooch. The morning sunlight caught the facets of the diamonds and illuminated the deep, perfect blue of the salon sapphires. The cluster was whole. The damaged prong held firm. The heirloom was safe. I picked up my tools and went back to work. Here is what the empty safe taught me. Family isn't the people who take your future to fund their present. Family is the people who help you build a new one. If you've ever had to buy back your own worth, drop a comment. Hit subscribe, and remember, keep your receipts. I will see you in the next one. We spend our lives chasing legacies. We buy sprawling houses in manicured neighborhoods. We invest in retirement portfolios. We lock heirloom jewelry in heavy velvet safes, believing we are preserving a bright future for the next generation. But the story of Olivia Smith and the stolen sapphire brooch reveals a devastating reality about what we are actually handing down to our children. The most valuable asset a parent leaves behind is not capital or property, it is character. When we examine the wreckage of the Smith family, we do not just see a tale of financial ruin. We see a profound failure of parenting values. We see a mirror reflecting the darkest temptations of modern American culture, where the appearance of prosperity is often prioritized over the quiet, heavy work of actual integrity. Helen and Richard built an empire of glass. They operated under a distorted version of the American dream. In their house, success was defined by country club invitations and the brand of car parked in the driveway. This superficial measurement of worth poisoned their parenting. They raised two daughters under the exact same roof, yet delivered them into entirely different psychological worlds. This is the inherent danger of conditional love. When parents treat affection and resources as a zero-sum game, they do not merely harm the neglected child. They destroy the sibling bond entirely. They turn brothers and sisters into competitors, fighting for a finite supply of approval. Fairness in a traditional family structure is not about dividing the bank accounts into identical portions. It is about emotional equity. It is about looking at each child and validating their intrinsic worth without measuring it against the achievements or aesthetics of anyone else. Consider Madison. She was placed on a pedestal so high the air lacked oxygen. Her parents shielded her from the word no. They funded her delusions, even when it meant cannibalizing her sister's rightful inheritance. We often want to give our children everything we never had. We want to clear every obstacle from their path to ensure a smooth journey. But when we remove the hurdles, we strip them of the opportunity to build resilience. Madison was handed a fairy tale wedding, paid for with stolen heirlooms and hidden credit card debt. Her parents thought they were securing her happiness. Instead, they were sabotaging her survival. When the illusion shattered and the funds dried up, Madison possessed no internal foundation to lean on. She was a paper doll caught in a hurricane, forced to learn the harsh realities of minimum wage retail because she was never taught the value of honest labor or the necessity of accountability. Shielding a child from reality is not a demonstration of love. It is an act of emotional negligence. Then we look at Olivia, the quiet caretaker, the daughter expected to absorb the financial and emotional deficits of the household. Olivia was told she was selfish for wanting her grandmother's legacy. Her valid grief was dismissed as jealousy. This total lack of emotional awareness from her parents forced her to build her own armor. She succeeded not because of her upbringing, but in spite of it. But a child should never have to become a forensic auditor of their own family's affection just to survive. Parents hold the immense responsibility of teaching emotional intelligence. That begins with validating a child's feelings, even when those feelings are inconvenient to the narrative the parents want to project. The tragedy here is rooted in a toxic relationship with the truth. Richard hid a catastrophic gambling addiction beneath a tailored polo shirt. Helen compromised her morals to keep her social status active. They lied to their neighbors. They lied to their daughters. They lied to themselves. It is incredibly easy to fall into the trap of performing success rather than practicing integrity. But children are brilliant, silent observers. They do not listen to the lectures we deliver. They watch the choices we make. When a parent demonstrates that avoiding embarrassment is more important than telling the truth, the child internalizes that corruption. Madison thought stealing the brooch from her mother was an acceptable solution because her mother modeled that exact behavior 3 years earlier. The apple does not fall far from the tree, especially when the roots are planted in poisoned soil. Raising children requires the courage to let them experience discomfort. It requires sitting at the kitchen table and having honest conversations about budgets, boundaries, and consequences. True family responsibility means protecting the emotional health of the household above the approval of the neighborhood. If Richard and Helen had simply admitted they were drowning in debt, the entire implosion could have been avoided. But pride is a heavy anchor, and it dragged the entire family to the bottom of the ocean. Stories like this hold a mirror up to the unspoken dynamics operating in our own living rooms. If you find value in exploring the deep, hidden currents of family life and the lessons we can pull from the wreckage, I invite you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel Sophia Told Stories. We explore the narratives that shape our lives, one hard truth at a time. Drop a comment below and share how your own family navigated the delicate balance between fairness and accountability. We are all architects. Every decision we make, every secret we keep, every quiet preference we show a child lays a brick in the foundation of their future. You can leave behind a mansion, a thriving business, or a wall safe full of diamonds. But if the emotional framework is rotten, the house will eventually fall. The ledger always balances in the end. The question you have to ask yourself tonight, as the house goes quiet and the lights turn off, is simple. When your children look back at the inheritance you left them, will they find a legacy built on genuine integrity, or will they open the door and find nothing but empty space?